One of the most common arguments that I've heard get brought up time and time again has been that Luther did not innovate at all. That indeed, when he added the German word "allein" for alone to Romans 3:28, that it had been done before him. That German Bibles and other Bibles had done that before Luther. Thus, Luther was not innovating at all. I've heard it over and over. And I remember I had heard it before I debated Turretin a number of years back. And we had gotten a debate set up, and I prepared to debate in the book of Romans, chapter 3, the whole book of Romans. For a long time, I devoured every Reformed commentary on the book of Romans. I devoured the patristic material, and I can tell you right now, the early fathers, none of them interpreted Romans 3:28 were justified by faith apart from works of the law the way Luther did. Not only did they not interpret it the way Luther did, well, they didn't even have that fanciful interpretation that Luther had. Now, we know certain fathers had no issue utilizing the term faith alone. An active, living, working faith is the way they would utilize it, not the way Luther utilized it. An alien righteousness, you're covered with a purity that you don't even truly possess. Don't tell me that I'm reading into them. I can quote from you. I own the Lutheran commentaries where I've read it over and over and over. You don't truly possess that purity, even though the Bible's very clear very clear, when it tells you you must be pure to enter the kingdom of heaven, and talks about you undergoing an inner purification to truly become cleansed. So I'm aware of it. I'm also aware that Protestants have a huge problem with this. And over the years, they've adopted, well, if you're not shocked that they've adopted fake quotes the way Anthony Rogers did and he got busted, well, maybe you're not going to be shocked at the fact that for probably over 2 decades, they've been arguing that Bibles before Luther, German Bibles, translated it as faith alone in Romans 3:28. Thus, when Luther added the word alone there, he was justified, pun intended. He wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. German Bibles before him had done it before. And I want you to hear what figures like James White have to say about this bunk, and it is total bunk.
Of justification. But what is interesting and maybe helpful to you is to know that Luther was not, in fact, doing something new. A lot of people think that he was not. The reality is that the Nurburg Bible of 1483. Now, remember, the Reformation begins.
I want to be very clear. You can clearly tell that James White is reading off of either a teleprompter, a line, or notes of his, whatever the case. James White has done it very often. He will regurgitate the very same lines he's used over the years. You can tell if you're careful, you look carefully, he's reading off of a prompter or something, and he's repeating what he said over and over throughout the years. I don't know why he never got busted before. Him and Turretin and James Swan had been using this argument for decades. I don't know why a Catholic didn't care enough to get a hold of the German Bibles before Luther. I don't know why they didn't care before. See that? German Bibles before Luther. See, because when I do my work, when I do my research, ignore the crayon writing on it, my daughter got a hold of it. When I do my research, and when any real apologist goes into a scholarly debate, they should go to the first-hand source material, not merely read what other people that are polemicists have to say. And James White tells you, well, German Bibles before Luther. What about German Bibles before Luther?
was not. The reality is that the Nurburg Bible of 1483. Now, remember, the Reformation begins in 1517. Luther is pushing this in the early 1520s. And so nearly 40 years earlier, the Nuremberg Bible of 1483 had allein durch den Glauben. Allein durch den Glauben. Alone.
Unbelievable.
Allein. Only through faith. The Italian Bible of Geneva in 1476, and then even in 1538, so this is after the Reformation, had in Latin per sola fide. Sola fide. Faith alone.
Unbelievable.
So this was in Geneva. But these were Italian Bibles, and 1476. So that's long before Luther. And so that means he was not alone in his understanding at this point, and that there were people before him. In fact, some have said that at least initially he was following them. Luther is pushing this in the early 1520s. And so nearly 40 years earlier, the reality is that the Nuremberg Bible of 1483. Now, remember,
the Nuremberg Bible is the Koberger Bible. Let me tell you that I looked at all of them. Went through all of them, went to the book of Romans. He's wrong. He didn't care to do the research. James White did not care at all to actually research and see whether or not Luther was correct, or whether he was an innovator, whether he was innovating. And indeed, Luther was innovating. Not a single German Bible before Luther had the audacity to translate Romans 3:28 the way James White is defending Luther's translation. That Greek word is not there. Thus, the German word shouldn't be there. This is what happens when you have a bias in theology. You cease to be a translator and you become an interpreter the way Luther did. We went ahead and we were able to get an actual photocopy from a rare edition of the 1483 Nuremberg Bible. We were able to get a copy of that. And we were able to go and look and see, indeed, is it translated the way James White claims it's translated? And no, it is not. Now, I'm not going to go through it with you, because you don't need to know German to realize that they will eventually, well, all of them except for James White, will eventually admit their incredibly bad error here. But do you catch how we're a little bit of irresponsible work can lead a lot of people down a very dangerous road, a very dangerous road. In our debate on Romans chapter 3, my debate with Francis Turretin of Alpha and Omega, in our debate on the topic, during the cross-examination, I was ready for him to try to spring that on me. And I want you to listen to the reply that I had for him. And I am very pleased to say that after the debate, prominent Lutheran, scholar, debater, James Swan, and Turretin Van retired this argument. It's done. But why won't Dr. White retire it? Why won't he realize it's been set out to pastor? Whereas other Catholic apologists may not have cared enough, over here at Patristic Pillars, you're not going to pull something on us when it comes to the early fathers or early history. You're not going to pull the wool over our eyes. You're not going to do it. The way I busted Anthony Rogers on a fake quote, multiple fake quotes, I busted these guys here as well. You're not going to fool us when it comes to church history. Not here at Patristic Pillars, I'm sorry.
You mentioned were referenced. you're aware then of the same post says at its bottom part, even some Catholic versions of the New Testament also translated Romans 3:28 as did Luther. The Nurburg Bible 1483 states allein durch den Glauben, and the Italian Bibles of Geneva 1476 and of Venice 1538 say per sola fide. Are you familiar with that portion of the blog post?
I am very familiar with that portion, and I think it is a complete fabrication.
Okay. And
I have actually, let me continue that. I have in front of me the Nurburg Bible from the year 1483, and that is a complete fabrication. Romans 3:28 does not read that way. And for anybody listening, I have a website that I just launched 2 days ago, www.romans328.com. You can pull that up right now, and you can see the actual page from the Nurburg Bible that is mentioned in your blog and that James White mentions in his published works. That word align does not exist there. That is a fabricated argument.
So your contention is just that there's previous authors who asserted that were mistaken about the content of the 1483, or you're saying that they're just lying and making it up?
I'm saying that James White read wrong. James White copied this from Charles Hodge, who Charles Hodge made an incorrect claim in regards to this. I got a hold of a copy of the Nurburg Bible from 1483, and it does not say that. There's only one Nurburg Bible in the year 1483. I've gotten a hold of copies of just about every one prior to Luther. Not a single translation, and the 1483 edition is a Koberger one. Not one has the text align in it. So the claim that Luther wasn't inventing this is incorrect. Luther invented this himself. This didn't exist before him. This was his own original adding. His claim that Ambrose and Augustine had done it was incorrect. Even at that, when he quotes Ambrose, it's not even Ambrose. The quote that he makes, Luther that he makes, doesn't even exist. So Luther himself doesn't even claim that a German translation before he came did it. But the argument that I've been hearing for about 15 years, and every place you can Google it, put 1483 Nurburg Bible. I've read people like Sproul use it. I've read loads of people use it. I can read German. I have that page on that website. This argument is fallacious.
So let's suppose that that Luther's translation of that particular text is not the correct translation. Let's say that it's not the correct translation, because in fact, I think we all agree that the original Greek did not include a.
Now, credit where credit is due. Swan, Reformed Lutheran, did admit the error in regards to this. In fact, he notes, says, did a pre-Reformation German Bible, did any of them, none of them did, include faith alone in his translation of Romans 3:28? Charles Hodge stated, and yes, that's correct, it's Charles Hodge, that a man is justified by faith. If by faith it is not of works, and if not of works, there can be no room for boasting. For boasting is the assertion of personal merit from the nature of the case. If justification is by faith, it must be by faith alone. Luther's version, therefore, allein durch den Glauben, is fully justified by the context. The Romanists indeed made a great outcry against that version as a gross perversion of Scripture. Although Catholic translators before the time of Luther had given the same translation. So in the Nurburg Bible of 1483, Nur durch den Glauben, and the Italian Bibles of Geneva, by the way, and none of them have that. The fathers also often use the expression. We've dealt with that as well. But he then notes, he says, it appears particularly the 1483 Nurburg Bible fact is misinformation. Give credit where it's due. One of Rome's defenders, William Albrecht, tracked down an online version of the Nurburg Bible. I did not track down a Nurburg Bible, an online version. I'm glad to know that now there are online versions, but I had to pay to get my photocopied edition. I didn't track down an online one. I wish I would have known. I wouldn't have had to pay, but I don't think an online version existed. Or maybe it did when I purchased my photocopied one. Anyway, William Albright tracked down an online version of the Nurburg Bible and makes a strong case that the Nurburg Bible of 1483 does not translate Romans 3:28 in such a way. And here's a look at Romans 3:28 from an online scan of the Bible. Yes, correct. Thank you. Thank you for admitting when you're wrong. What appears to have happened is that Nurburg Glauben is in the Nurburg Bible, but found in, yes, Galatians, not Romans. And it completely changes the whole context. Completely does not support faith alone theology in the least bit. Not in the least bit does it support faith alone theology. Hodge says to see Kopp and Tholuck on this verse. I was able to track down Tholuck, and he mentions Galatians 2:16 as well. Truncated version of Hodge's information has traveled it far across cyberspace, even finding its way into print by well-respected authors. For instance, R.C. Sproul utilized a version of it in his book, Faith Alone. Yes, R.C. Sproul also made that horrible error. Even he made that. So I'm glad that people are now, and yes, it does call into question the Italian Bibles, because none of them have that. And I would like for them to try and conjure that up. I bet they won't. I bet now that they have been busted on this big, massive problem, I bet you they're not going to utilize that argument. What does this really come down to? It comes down to the fact that we need to do better research. Now, a lot of Protestants that debate online are unable to do it. They are unable to. And a lot of people of many faiths are unable to do the proper research. So they end up quoting second or third hand source material. It happens all the time. We've seen it all the time happen. And that's the problem. Because if you end up quoting other individuals and they end up being wrong, well, then you end up looking like you got mud on your face. James White's been corrected. I've corrected him. And James White and myself, every now and then we will exchange, I won't say pleasant conversation, but every now and then we will dialogue with one another. I corrected him many times. He doesn't care. He doesn't care one bit. I think there are more honest interlocutors in the Protestant sphere, in the world doing actual scholarship. Two of the ones I respect greatly are Turretin and James Swan. I don't think James Swan debates. I respect Turretin a lot because these are people that when they get corrected, they say, okay, I made a mistake. I needed to clean that mistake up. And they clean it up. And they better their apologetic material. I can appreciate that. But ultimately, why do we find arguments like this being used? You got to stop and wonder, why do we do it? And I'm going to remind you why. I'm going to play the clip again of James White, and you're going to know exactly why Protestants use this argument.
It's interesting and maybe helpful to you is to know that Luther was not, in fact, doing something new.
There you go. Right there. Protestants do not want to seem like innovators. They don't want to admit that Luther created sola fide and sola scriptura. They don't want to admit that. They don't. Protestants do not want to admit that their religion is an innovation and a mutation, because if they do, then they're going to have to admit, well, wow, if we don't have a foothold in the ancient church, then how are we appealing to people to leave Romanism, the Romish, Popish beliefs, as they say? They want to try and rehabilitate the fathers. That is why James and others will tell you, well, look, Luther wasn't doing anything new when he translated Romans 3:28 to read faith alone. But indeed, Luther was doing something new and unique. And if Luther was doing something new and unique, then you've got an innovator there. And clearly he was doing it to bolster the religion he had ended up creating, putting forth sola fide and sola scriptura. Shocking. Shocking. Hear more of James White.
A lot of people think that he was not. The reality is that the Nurburg Bible of 1483. Now, remember, the Reformation begins in 1517. Luther is pushing this in the early 1520s. And so nearly 40 years earlier.
You see, if you are able to tell your audience nearly 4 decades earlier, translations of German Bibles were already in print. Luther was not doing anything new. Then you're able to make this religion seem more attractive to people. What a mess when you have to put forth this argument. Now, I know James White was relying on second, third, whatever hand information, but that's the problem when you don't do your research. We've caught James White and others using fake quotes. We've caught them using fake canons and using fabricated history, because this is a plain old lie. I mean, what else can you say? The gentleman who claimed that it was the Koberger Bible, that it had that translation, why would he even say it? Somebody tell him he never even looked, he never researched it? This is a problem. This is why we tell you, you must do first-hand research. If you have been edified by this video, please consider smashing the like and flooding the comment section for the algorithm. If you like videos like this, early release videos, exclusive courses that can only be found on Patreon, if you're a member, only there, that we never air for the public. We're talking about scholarly level courses like Purgatory, Immaculate Conception, Mariology. Some of the courses run 40 to 45 hours long for the whole course, with notes, with brand new translations, ultimate sneak peeks into brand new books that we have coming out, and tons more. Consider going over there and being a patron. Consider supporting our work in any way you can. And if you can't support our work that way, consider praying for us and flooding the comment section for the algorithm, so that your Protestant friends can realize this is an argument that we've put away. And the next time you hear it being used, you point them to this video. God bless you. God keep you. I'm praying for you. I hope you're praying for me.